Hello and welcome to this video. On this video, I'm going to be ranking the albums of the progressive rock band Yes. And I will be looking at the period between 1969 and 1984, starting with their debut album, which was called Yes, and finishing with their album that relaunched them in the 1980s called 90125. After that, I feel the band starts to stumble a little bit, going into the debacles of albums like Union, trying to hit the pop charts with albums like Big Generator, and then having multiple lineup changes. And I think when I've ranked this band before and tried to consider all those albums that come after 90125, it just confuses the issue. And so I wanted to create a video for those people who want to, introduce themselves to Yes, which is undoubtedly, I think, the greatest progressive rock band of all time, and really concentrate on the albums that count so we can really get into the meat and potatoes of why this band is so great. So we're going to be looking at 11 albums on this list, and I'm going to jump straight in at number 11. And the number 11 that I'm going to have is actually the debut album, which is called Yes. Now, let's have a look at the lineage of this band. John Anderson is Yes. It's his band. He formed it, and he's the artistic and aesthetic driving force for Yes, without a doubt. It is a personification of that man for me. He's been around for a while. He was born in 1944, so he's like 20 years old by the time the Beatles really come out to hit. So he's really more of a product of skiffle and rock and roll. So it's interesting this guy's going to go all the way up through to progressive rock. He's actually in a band, I think they're called the Warriors before that, and they've had some success. And he's coming out of a very British reaction to the West Coast American bands. We could say the Byrds. We would also look at bands like Love, perhaps. And he's also a big fan of the Beatles. And he loves the Everly Brothers. And you can see he loves vocal harmonies. He loves sweet songs. And he is part, really, of a tradition that is coming out of almost like the American folk boom. A lot of musicians at that time came out of that. If we look at a musician like Robert Plant, yes, I've mentioned him that quickly, he too is a product of listening to those West Coast bands. I think if Robert Plant had formed his own band in 1968, without the influence of Jimmy Page, it may have sounded a lot more like the Yes of the debut album than Led Zeppelin did. Of course, Yes was signed to the same label as Led Zeppelin at the same time. These were the big two investments that the Atlantic Records had done. Now, Armand Erkin, who had ran that with his brother Nasu Erkin, who was a producer, had made their name recording initially jazz artists like Ray Charles, and then R&B artists like Aretha Franklin, and they really understood, Black American music. Towards the end of the 60s, they decided to get into this sort of rock music thing, signing Led Zeppelin, who were an instant success, and Yes, who weren't. This debut album came out, and it is not progressive rock. It is more a sort of British take on the Byrds, with elements of the Beatles. In fact, they do a Byrds cover on this album, and they do a Beatles cover on this album. The lineup at this point is Peter Banks on guitar, who's got a very sort of clean tone Wes Montgomery approach, which he showcases brilliantly on this album. Chris Squire on bass, and just joined the band at that point was a very, very young Bill Bruford, who was 20 years old, and this is his first time in the recording studios. And he feels that his approach on this album was confused, to say the least. It's obvious that Bill Bruford is a budding jazz fan, and he's bringing in sort of a British jazz drum style, very influenced by drummers like Alan Ganley, I believe, into this sort of rock and roll realm. It's not a prog album. When I bought it as a kid, I loved it because I loved to hear Bruford. Bruford was well recorded and was doing lots of things that I thought were amazing, lots of little left-hand, runs and little jazz stuff, which I thought was, I'd never heard that in rock music, so I loved it. There was lots of soloing for Peter Banks. I loved his tone. I thought it was a great album. It's beautifully recorded. Atlantic knew how to record a band at that point. But it was recorded in March 1969. Okay, it was recorded before In the Court of the Crimson King by Yes was even recorded, which I think was recorded a little bit later, around about July, when this album was coming out. At the end of the year, around about October, I think, finally we get the release of In the Court of the Crimson King. And it's almost as though that album then just alights a whole bunch of bands at that point. Genesis is another one. You can see that just sort of, they all sort of, what the hell's this? And so the only reason why this is right down the bottom is that it's not indicative of Yes, but if you love the sound of John Anson's voice and you love Bill Bruford and you love the Yes sound, it's a great album. And this is the level we're talking about. This is a great album. 3 stars, 3.5 stars, I would say, for this album. Right, that's where we're starting. If we move to the next album on my list, it is the second album, Time in a Word. Now, by the time they get to Time in the Word, yes, they've heard King Crimson, and they've also heard other bands. You know, they've heard the Moody Blues, and they've heard Deep Purple, and all these bands had gone into the studio with an orchestra. And so, yes, on their second album, because remember the first album was not a hit, did not deliver what Atlantic Records did. They decided to do what a lot of other bands are doing, and that's bring an orchestra in, albeit in this case quite a small orchestra, and write an album with them. This is a progressive rock album. Now, it did chart for them. I think if this album hadn't charted, Yes might have been looking at getting the boot, but it did chart. But we start to see problems emerging within the band. The first one being that they haven't got the right producer. The album doesn't sound great. The engineer that was working on it was a young man called Eddie Offord, and he has said that he didn't feel like the production was right on this album. And Eddie Offord is moved up to a production level on the next album. It sounds muddy. It doesn't sound like Yes. And especially when you've got brass and strings, which is basically what this little orchestra is, being brought in on an album. And we also see that Peter Banks is getting frustrated at this point. He believed that the producer didn't like his guitar style, so it was getting buried in the mix. It was more likely because they had this orchestra to deal with, and a lot of what Peter Banks was doing in terms of playing chords and things like that was being done by the orchestra. Tony Kaye, who was playing organ at this point, and I think electric piano, but mainly organ, was playing a lot of the sort of melodies there. So Peter Banks is get pushed out a little bit, but more to the point is, Yes, start to develop this democratic process where every single part has to be passed by the band. And so I imagine there's lots of discussions where, you know, you'd be sat there with your drum part while they all stroke this and say, I don't think it's right. Well, I like the way the ride cymbal is. I'm not sure. And that must have been really frustrating. And Peter Banks, I think, and this is a scourge of Yes, he's a jazz guy and he wants to improvise. He just doesn't want to play the parts. And I think his frustration means that he, after Time in the Word, goes. And so the banding is a little bit of disarray. Right, they've done this album. They've moved tentatively into progressive rock. You know, Peter Banks was pointing out that he thought that they'd only brought an orchestra in, you know, for the shallow commercial reasons of wanting to, you know, compete with Deep Purple or the Moody Blues or whoever it was. They were all doing it at that point. And so it's not a truly successful album. In terms of my liking, I actually prefer the first album over this one, but the best of this album is proper Yes. That's the point. We start to hear, you know, certain points, and here we go. This is starting to sound like Yes. This is starting to sound like prog. Peter Banks goes, and then they bring in, from the band Tomorrow, Steve Howe. Now, I have friends who were working in London on the scene at that point, and Steve Howe was an absolute monster. He really was. This guy could play flamenco, classical guitar. He could play slide guitar. He could play jazz like Wes Montgomery. He could burn and play rock and country licks. You know, he had it all going on. And so they bring Steve Howe in and they push Eddie Offord up. And then I think at that point, all the stuff is in place. Nearly. No, it's not nearly, is it? But it's part of the way there, you know. And Time in the Word suffers for not being in that bracket of Yes magic. And I think it's really important for Yes. If Yes is truly the democratic band that they have said they are, and with that process, there's no mastermind writing compositions and bringing them in. With this, everything is going through the band, so we have a band sound. And I think this is why, as Yes has carried on, the personalities who have tried to gain control of the band has actually upset it. So really, you don't have the process anymore. So the spirit of Yes doesn't really exist anywhere. But we'll get onto that in a minute. So what have I got at number 9? I have Tormato. Now, Tormato is the album they made in 1978. Yes took a hiatus between 1974 and 76, and they all went off and did solo albums. They came back and made the album Going for the One, which was also a return to the classic lineup with Rick Wakeman. Going for the One is an incredible album, and one of my favourite albums of all time, and will feature high on this list. They then went off to, I think it was Montreux, without Eddie Offord, and I think this is a big problem with this Tormato album, and went there with the idea of making 2 albums, and this would be the first with another one released at Christmas. They'd written a whole bunch of songs while on tour. They decided to dump all those and start writing again. So what we have here, I'm afraid, is an album that's not that well produced, a little bit confused compositionally. The Yes sound has changed a little bit. Rick Wakeman's returned with a whole bank of other keyboards, and he's doing all sorts of other things in there. This is still a Yes album, and when it kicks in, it's a Yes album. And when Yes kick in, there's no band that sounds like them. They're amazing, and so this is a good album. It's only bad compared to the rest. I never liked it that much. I think the single off it, Don't Kill the Whale, is insipid. And also, I don't want any whales killed, and I don't like it. But I don't want my progressive rock bands telling me not to kill any whales, because I don't go around killing whales. So it was all a bit self-righteous, and I've never liked that. Looking back into it, it's there's no Roger Dean cover. There's no Eddie Offord. We do have the proper Yes lineup, but there's something missing from it, isn't there? There's just something missing from with Tormato. And I was looking into it this morning, and what I didn't even know. So I'm going to give you a piece of information I didn't know till this morning. I went, "Whoa, that's interesting," and I haven't fully developed this idea, but I will try to. There is a place on Dartmoor Common, I believe, called Yes Tor. Now, a tor, which is like this sort of little mountainy thing, little hill high area, and they're linked to ley lines, I think, and they've got all this sort of pagan English aesthetic going on. I like the idea of a tor. And so the tor is referencing that in the title, Tor. And this place is called Yes Tor. So that's the first part, right? And when you look at the cover, we see a man divining. He's on a ley line and he's divining with those sticks. I thought it was someone playing an invisible snare drum when I was a kid. Now he's divining. So he's feeling the lay of the land. And he's actually at Yes Tor. So this points to this sort of pagan, English underworld will-o'-the-wisp thing that I love very much, right, on the cover, right? And it's almost like they've said, this is the idea. Now, a marto actually is Portuguese for a thicket. Again, it points to a scrub of land. So we've got the reference to the land here. That's very interesting. And the production is woody. I think they were nearly there with something with this. But of course, there is the double meaning of a tomato. And in this case, it's the tomato that you throw at something that's a load of rubbish. It's almost as though Yes knew this was a load of rubbish. That was the attempt, and they didn't achieve it. And that's the concept behind the album, is the fact that their divining for this sort of English deep aesthetic didn't work. That's my totally pretentious take on this album for you. But this is what you come for, isn't it? Is that type of thing. Shall we move on? So the follow-up to that album was Drama, and that's the album I've got down at number 7. Drama's a fantastic album. It's almost like the opposite of Tormato. We've got Eddie Offord back in. We've got like Roger Dean doing the cover. They're back to doing the sort of more rocky stuff and not divining for this sort of, pagan English aesthetic type thing. So they're back to doing that, but they're not Yes. Right? Because Rick's gone and John Anderson has gone. John Anderson's not there. And who have they gone and got? The Buggles, right? If this wasn't well known in Yes lore, it would seem like a strange dream, wasn't it? Was it a strange dream that the Buggles once fronted Yes on an album and it was really good? Right? When I first heard this album, I thought, well, John Anderson is on it. Trevor Horn's not too far off. It's a good album. It's really, really good. The opening track, what's that called? Machine Messiah, is it? Or Metal Messiah? Or is that? I can't remember. I don't know the titles of these later albums so well. But that's fantastic. One of Yes's greatest tracks and would be on a best of Yes without a doubt. Drama is really, really good. It just isn't quite Yes, and we're aware of that. But it's almost there, isn't it? It's very interesting. It also heralds their entrance into the 80s. Yes was still selling records. They were still making progressive rock albums. Here they are in because I think this is like 1980, just hammering it in, still doing the prog and still getting there. With Trevor Horn on vocals, who's going to become the sound of the 80s. And he's going to become the sound of the 80s with Yes. So Drama is a great album. And it's the one, once you've got past this and the next album, we have basically the 6 essential albums that if you're into Yes, you have to own. And then once you've got those 6, the next one would be Drama. And not the next one I've got, higher than Drama, which is 90125. So in 1983, Yes is over. The Trevor Horn thing didn't work out. And they have, the Yes members, or some of them, I think Chris Squire, Alan White, Rick Wakeman's gone. They're working with a brilliant singer-guitarist called Trevor Rabin, and he's re-energized. He's got all these sort of 80s guitar hook things going on, and it's all very Toto, foreigner going on with old Trevor Rabin. But Trevor Rabin's a really great musician as well. And they're working on this album, and they've got Trevor Horn now producing it. Now, Trevor Horn has produced bands like ABC. He's going to go on to do Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and he's got the 80s sound, right? The last thing you would have thought they needed at this point with hit records like Owner of a Lonely Heart would be to draft John Anderson in and get him to sing about some eagle flying over the landscape. You wouldn't have thought that would be the thing that was needed, but it was. And those two things coming together, and this is old Yes and new Yes, right? A lot of Yes fans hate 90125. I'm a musician. When I listen to it, I hear there's no change. It's Yes. Right, they're still doing all the amazing Yes things, but they've bound it down into these little pop songs. But they're still immensely complex. They've still got these like timing things moving over them. They still move through these sort of orchestrated type of things. But the orchestrate is not a word, but it's exactly what they use on this album. The harmony vocals are pushed to a max. It's full of incredible tunes. I absolutely love this album. Right from things like the sort of pop of Leave It. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Leave It. I bought that as a 12-inch with the vocal a cappella on. Incredible. Owner of a Lonely Heart is if you're talking about that sort of FM staple rock, and we're looking at things like Africa and Rosanna and, Cold as Ice or whatever it is, Hold the Line, that's in that realm. That's where they are at. Owner of a Lonely Heart is the best example of that, and it's profound. It's absolutely profound. If you listen to it, what it is championing is liberty, individuality, being able to stand up on yourself and be your own person, right? And it's arguing that, to have that liberal, individualistic thing is so important that it goes beyond romantic love. It's beyond that. It's a very profound set of lyrics. I love this album. but it does herald for me the end of Yes. Their sort of anal retentive perfectionism that blinded so many progressive rock bands meant that they never followed this up with the album that should have then put them into superstar level in the 1980s. They would have been one of the biggest acts of the 1980s if they'd have followed this up. But years later, we get the Big Generator album, and then we get an album of them playing solos, and it's just not right. And then you get Anderson, Wakeman, Broof, and Howe. So all the other non-members of this film their own Yes, and that starts up. And then they all get back together, and they do the album Union, which is seen as a big failure. I actually quite like Union. None of these albums I hate. It's all great stuff, but there's something gone at that point. It's as though they sold their soul to the devil when they did 90125, and they can never go back. They can never go back. But the thing is, being the best example of 70s progressive rock, there's no way they really could negotiate themselves through the 80s. And so 90125 is almost like a miracle. ELP couldn't do it. Genesis could do it. Right, but Genesis managed to follow it up. And Genesis was built a lot off the solo career of Phil Collins. Now, the same thing had happened, is that John Anderson had gone off with Vangelis and made some lovely 80s pop albums that were still ethereal and full of all the Yes magic. And I think it was the pulling in of that and integrating that into this sort of FM rock sound, which gave them their success. It's a mystery. I still don't feel I've said what needs to be said about this album, but I do feel it's the end of Yes. I do think if you buy all the albums from the first album to 90125, and you go, you could say I've got all the Yes albums, because the other ones aren't really Yes. They like refer to Yes, but none of them have ever been Yes. It's like the Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe album is more of a Yes album of that time than Big Generator is. You see what I'm saying? And that's not Yes, but it's more like Yes. At the moment, the thing that's most like Yes is the band Geeks with John Anderson. But it's not Yes. And I can hear it's not Yes. Because that democratic process is not at work. And so what we hear is a brilliant rendition of what Yes used to sound like. What we don't have is the democratic process ploughing into new ideas and new ground and new things being opened up. Chatting to the band Geeks guys, they were always really shocked that John Anderson is always pushing it to areas that are Yes, like, you know, oh, can't we have that guitar part on French horn was an example of what I was told John Anderson's like, because that is the Yes spirit. If he had some other people like that happened to be Rick Wakeman and Chris Squire and Alan White, if you had those people doing that, then it would be Yes. This is the trouble. Bands are bands. And when they're not there anymore, they don't exist anymore. Right, so let's get on to the top 6. Each one of these is a masterpiece. Each one of these you could actually say is Yes's greatest album as well. If I put any one of these on the top list, it wouldn't be wrong. At number 6, I have Tales from Topographic Oceans. Right, I've done a whole video on Tales from Topographic Oceans. I've gone deep down into it. This is the consensus. When it came out, it went to number 1. It was a massive success. For a double album that is so obscure and weird to go to number 1, that makes it an even greater success in my book. Once punk came out and they needed some sort of ammunition to point at prog and say how overblown and pretentious it was, Tales from Topographic Ocean became the thing that they kicked. It was the example of how terrible progressive rock was. But it's not indulgent, right? It's not over the top. It's not pretentious. It is just a huge piece of work which is attempting to do something within rock which is just so incredible, right? Which is to try and examine the world that we live in, the topographic space, which is what we exist in. They are trying to take on the big subjects, and the critics didn't like that. But the fact that they got halfway there needs to be commended. This album for me suffers from the fact that they have the idea of trying to make a double album with 4 sides on, and they just aren't quite there with it. So they're stretching the material out. On my channel, I use the analogy of Lord of the Rings when Bilbo describes to Gandalf that he feels like butter that's been spread over too much bread. Well, Tales from Topographic Oceans is that butter. That's a good analogy. I think it is. They'll love that. because not only is it a good analogy, but it's Lord of the Rings. And Yes fans, they all love Lord of the Rings. So you did really well then. They all liked it. You liked it. The trouble is when you said it in the way you did, it put you off, didn't it? Because you knew how good it was. Just move on. They know how good it is. You're talking to yourself like Roger Waters now. You don't want to be doing that, because that's the first sign of madness. And you don't want to end up mad like Roger Waters, do you? So let's get back into the video. So yes, yes. Tales from Topographic Oceans, yes. Brilliant album. Some of Yes's best moments, padded out a little bit here and there, but nothing too bad. Still a masterpiece. Why haven't I got it right at the top? I tell you what it is. It's not entirely this, but where's Bill Bruford? It's like Alan White, he finds his feet, but Alan White has got a lot on his plate at that time. Alan White, so why does Bruford leave the band? That's something worth explaining. Bruford, like Peter Banks, is a jazz guy. He wanted to improvise, and also, yes, use a sort of harmonic palette, which is not coming from jazz. It's much more coming from classical music. It's much more sort of major, minor, dominant triads type of harmony. That's where they come from. They do very complex things with it, but it's not jazz harmony. And that sort of darkness they get with jazz harmony, Bill Bruford wanted to explore. Now, that's John Anderson's fault, because he used to encourage Bill Bruford to write. He was a drummer. And this 5% and Nothing off Fragile was his first attempt to write. So he, after doing Close to the Edge and that democratic process of his drum parts being put through this, and it must have been incredibly tedious and then real achievement. And he just thought, I can't do this again. And he went off and joined King Crimson to go and do something else, which was a lot more improvisation. And Bill Bruford then again redefines progressive rock drumming for a second time. He does it about 4 times, I believe, maybe even 5. Bruford, proper one of the greats. So he's gone. And so you've got Alan White, who's a session guy, who's been playing with John Lennon and doing, he's played on Imagine and stuff like that. They pull him in, and they pull him in halfway through this tour. So in 1973, they bring out the triple album Yes Songs, which I haven't looked at. Yes Songs is an epic of a documentation of Yes in 93 at their peak. At the time, it sounded awful and muddy. It's probably got the greatest progressive rock cover of all time in that big triple gatefold thing. I sold my copy because I never liked it, and I'm going to go and get it again just for the cover. I'm going to get it on vinyl at some point because it's such an incredible cover and it's so out there. But it actually documents Bruford going. He's on a couple of tracks. I think it's on Perpetual Change and another one. Yours is No Disgrace, perhaps, I don't know. And then Alan White comes in. Alan White has got a lot on his plate, so he has to come into Yes and learn stuff like Close to the Edge and go out on tour. How the guy did it, I don't know. And then once that's done, he's then carted off into the studio to try and find his own sound on an album which is even more monumental. Alan White does an incredible job, and he's got solo spots and all sorts. I mean, he was really put through the mill, wasn't he? And he came up with the goods. But actually, if you listen to the drum sound on Tales from Topographic Ocean, it goes up and down like this. Sometimes it sounds okay, sometimes it sounds terrible. I think they had production problems. I think it was just such a huge thing to take on at that time, working on tape and having to edit tape. And so I think they did as best as they could. It's a huge achievement. Now, if I was to compare it, say, to War of the Worlds by Jeff Wayne, which I'm going to do, I've got that on CD. Somebody sent it me. I don't know who it is, but if it is, thank you very much. I've been listening to it and I'm loving it. I've been listening to that and I'm going, well, this is the greatest progressive rock album ever made. It's a double album. It never lets up. It's coherent and it integrates even bigger and wilder things. But of course, at that point, by 1978, they had these massive multi-track recorders. Anyway, I am whittling on here. Topographic Oceans is a great album. Slightly... Just a little slightly at fault. And that's why it's down here. Above that, number 5, I have the album that introduced me to progressive rock, that introduced me to Yes, and actually introduced me to a world that went beyond heavy metal, and that's the Yes album. The Yes album is incredible. It's got some of their greatest songs on there. Starship Trooper is one of their finest moments. It does not have Rick Wakeman on. It's the last hurrah for Peter Banks, who does a wonderful job. And I like the sound of the Yes album. It has its own sound. What we're lacking is not the Moog, it's not the synths, it's the Mellotron. Right, there's no Mellotron, I don't think, on the Yes album. If there is, it's used very slightly. This is one of the classic Yes albums. For me, I could easily say this is my favourite Yes album because it's the one I discovered Yes by. So, a monumental album. Interesting in that it's got the track Clap, which is incorrectly titled The Clap, which is a solo piece of Steve Howe, who comes in, and his input into Yes just it provides something that suddenly the orchestration's coming together. It's quite wonderful to hear that, and how much that's rooted around the vast vocabulary that Steve Howe has on guitar as he comes in. So it's wonderful to hear that live version of Clap. I think they did a studio recording of it as well. So it's interesting. It's always interesting that little live thing sat there breaking up this album, which is sort of, well, it's like the prog sandwich, you know. But in this case, you've got sort of quite an epic and a little track and an epic. Then you turn it over and you've got another epic, little track and an epic. Some of these epics aren't really epic. Some of them are basically the same song done acoustic and then done electric, or done straight time and then shuffles. You really start to see how Yes are not great arrangers, right? They are and they're not. What they are is they're brilliant at inventing how you arrange prog. And I know all those rules. But they don't compose like a composer because of this democratic process. You really see this enacted and it works so well. The Starship Trooper is a brilliant example of that. It's basically three different ideas all just crammed together. But it's crammed together in such a brilliant way. The other band that's doing that at this time is Black Sabbath. And I have to wonder whether they had a bit of influence off them, because Black Sabbath do the same thing. It's like this sort of crash change, you know, on the gear stick. You've got an arrangement here, you know, you've got an arrangement here in third gear, and then you've got another arrangement that you want to go to in second gear, and you could compose something that moves you there, or you can just grab it and crash over to it, is how Black Sabbath do it, isn't it? And it's a little bit like that, but I love it. These aren't criticisms. The Yes album's amazing. The only reason why it's down here is that there's a definitive Yes sound, and it's not quite there. Where's it going to come from? It's going to come from Mr. Rick Wakeman. Right, above the Yes album, I have Relayer. Relayer is, it follows on from Topographic Oceans. Rick Wakeman's got sick of it. So Bruford's gone, now Rick Wakeman's gone. And they go searching around for a keyboard player. My God, do they find one? Patrick Moraz, probably the most virtuoso keyboardist to ever go through Yes. A guy that he was in a band called Refugee before this, and he is basically coming out of a prog background, classical background, but also a jazz rock background. By the time this album comes out in 1974, bands like Return to Forever and Mahavishnu Orchestra really created a impact on the music scene. Yes, went out on tour with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and I think it had just sort of blown them away a little bit. And they go in and make what is the closest to their jazz rock album. The title track, Gates of Delirium, is an incredible epic. And where Close to the Edge had been so controlled and precise, this is absolute chaos. And really, it really depicts war. And it's almost like that battle that happens in Lord of the Rings. Sorry to bring them up again, in front of the gates to Mordor. I've always felt that's what you hear, and all that clunking of metal, you know, and all that destruction that then emerges in one of John Anderson's greatest melodies, one of their greatest songs. You know, people can say this is overblown, but one of the most concise, beautiful songs that Yes ever did is the Soon section of Gates of Delirium. When you flip it over, there's two tracks, To Be Over, and then there's a track before then, which I can't remember the title of. But if you listen to that, that really grew out of ideas that Patrick Moraz had brought in, and really sounds not like the Mahavishnu Orchestra. I've always said it sounds like Mahavishnu. This album sounds like Return to Forever. That's what it sounds like. And that's because Return to Forever sound like Yes. That's what's going on here, which I can remember the title of that track. It's so bloody famous. You all shouted it at you. It's not that I don't know it. I've had a senior moment. So we move on. When it comes to me in about 5 minutes, I'll shout it in the middle of talking about another album. So that's what I've got number 4. Above that, I have Going for the One. The aforementioned album, when they'd had their little break and gone off and done all their solo albums, they all came back together. They kicked Patrick Moraz out and they brought in Rick Wakeman back in. Rick Wakeman comes back in and they classic Yes is there. They don't have Eddie Offord, and this album does have a different sound. It is a little bit more reverby, but I actually like it. Going for the One is slightly different. The Yes album and Going for the One, a bookend, the absolute genius part of Yes's catalogue. And Going for the One's absolutely incredible. The track Going for the One and Parallels, I absolutely love those tracks. They're really incredible and they rock. This is the thing. And to hear, Steve Howe on that slide guitar, it's incredible. But when you flip the album over, Wondrous Stories is undoubtedly, Yes, at their best proggy, ethereal and yet tight pop song structured world. Wondrous Stories is perhaps the greatest short prog tune ever made. Maybe competing against, I don't know, Close to the Heart by Rush perhaps, or Spirit of the Radio by Rush or Tom Sawyer. They were very good. Rush were really good at not just doing long tracks, but really short, concise tracks that could get in the charts, but were still prog. Wondrous Stories is them at their best. Awaken, for me, is undoubtedly their greatest epic. It surpasses Close to the Edge. Close to the Edge was first. By the time they got to do Awaken, they had addressed those little things that I said about this sort of prog sandwich and this idea of just sticking 4 tracks together. Awaken's not like that, and I know some Yes fans don't like it because I think what you have with that is one idea that just emerges, and it really is a through composed piece. When I listen to it, it's quite astonishing. And the effect that has is that when I did my video years ago, where I went through the top 10 greatest epics of all time, I didn't even put this on the list because I felt that this track was about 7 or 8 minutes long. When you go back to it, it's well over 15 minutes. It could be a sidelong epic. It doesn't feel like that because rather than it going through 4 or 5 different things like all the other ones do, like Gates of Delirium or anything off Topographic Oceans or definitely Close to the Edge, it just takes that one idea, it spins it out, and you get lost in it. And it's just incredible. Awaken is the finest moment in progressive rock. Side 2 of Going for the One, I believe, is the greatest side in progressive rock. And side 1 is pretty good. That's where we're at. And so how do you beat Going for the One, which I've got at number 3? There's 2 albums here, right? And obviously you'll know what they are. But which way round are we going to have? Well, this is not as simple as you think, right? At number 2, I've got Fragile. Fragile sits between the Yes album and Close to the Edge. It's the first time you've got the classic lineup. This is Yes's finest hour. Without a doubt, Roundabouts and in the Heart of the Sunrise, and the short but incredibly sweet. Come on, Andy, you've been listening to these albums for 40 years. Right, so let's go. It opens with Roundabout, right? It's a good argument that Roundabout combines everything that Yes ever did in a track that does everything that Yes does. It's their greatest moment. I just said Awaken's the greatest moment in progressive rock. But in terms of Yes, you get yourself tied up here. Roundabout is culturally significant. My kids know that tune, right? And it's Yes, and it does everything that you expect from Yes, right? In the Heart of the Sunrise takes what King Crimson were doing, and it goes towards what Rush and King Crimson are going to go later on. It's heavy and dark, something that we don't associate with Yes. That opening riff, the heavy opening riff, is incredible. South Side of the Sky, again, is just a monumental, epic track. Those 3 tracks form the foundation of this album. Around that, we've got a whole bunch of solo pieces, which, in a way, compromise this album. Now, the reason why that happened is just because the budgets weren't there and they didn't have enough time to write, so they couldn't use their democratic process to come up with the big epics, and so everybody brought ideas in. Now, Mood for a Day, which is a beautiful guitar piece, if you listen to the studio version of Clap, it actually moves into Mood for a Day, and I have no problem with the solo acoustic guitar part on a Yes album. That's brilliant. It's like an essential thing. I love that. John Anderson's We Are Heaven, right, that one. I love it. I just wish it bookended the album. I wish it opened up with that as like a little opening, and then because it finishes the album. And I think so. I really believe if Fragile was reordered, it would be Yes's greatest album. Bill Bruford's little sort of rhythmically dense thing that he wrote is absolutely amazing. Couldn't we have just edited that into another track? Surely that would have even enhanced the sort of angular darkness of In the Heart of the Sunrise even more. That's okay. Fish's bass thing's brilliant, isn't it? The Fish. That one, I love that, with all those harmonics. That's great. Love that track. What else have we got on there? Solo people-wise. Rick Wakeman's Cans and Brahms. It's rubbish. Shouldn't have been on the album. He wasn't allowed to bring a composition in because he was still signed to A&M and they wouldn't let him do it at that point. And so he couldn't do that. I don't know whether that went all the way through his contract with Yes, because I don't know whether he was allowed to write, be part of the writing team, but not write his own thing. So he couldn't do that. Because it's. I mean, even Rick Wakeman doesn't like it. It's... And then there's the one that's about religion, and it's one of Yes's greatest tunes, and I can't remember what it's called. And I thought by this time I would have remembered it. I can't believe I don't know the name of that track. This is rubbish. You know the one I mean. Come on, what's it called? Long distance, run around, long time, waited to feel the sound. Where's the bass? Boom. I still remember the dreams there, boom. I still remember the time you said goodbye, dun dun. Beatles down in my line, walking in the sunshine. That is one of their greatest short tunes, like Wondrous Stories, Long Distance Run Around. Just to prove to you, it's not, I don't know these words. I know these words, I just don't know where they are in my brain, right? And I can pull out how the tunes go. That's always there. I can always get to there, right? And I know that, but I just can't remember the words. It's the words I can't remember. I don't know where they are. That's at number 2, Fragile. Right, so I think they did a version of America around this time. The tune by Leonard Bernstein. Is that right? So I've had a listen to that. If you got rid of Cans and Brahms and we put that on instead, would we have Yes's greatest album? I think we might. But it's hard one to compete against what I've got at number 1, which is Close to the Edge. Their defining epic from 1972. This does everything. It has that incredible minimal Roger Dean cover, where Roger Dean's not even trying anymore. He's so confident in what he's doing. He said, "We'll just have it. It'll just be green," and it's still incredible and iconic. You've got like one epic and 2 smaller epics, right? They're 3 of Yes's best moments, I think Yes are at their most sublime. It's the opening to And You and I. That's their most sublime. I love this band. All the stuff's bloody brilliant. This is the thing. I love Yes so much. I like progressive rock because I like Yes. But I gotta be honest, and I like Genesis and ELP. I've learned to love again. And I love King Crimson. But Yes, for me, that's the band that I just absolutely love. I think they should be up there with the bloody Beatles and the Rolling Stones. They're just as good. They're better than the Beatles, right? I love the Beatles, but I love Yes more. Close to the Edge is just amazing. If I put it on now, I'm sitting there all the way through it. I love this band, right? And this is what nobody says. We can sit there and criticise them and stuff like this, but the hit rate is incredible, especially when you think what they're trying to do, right? When you think what their vision is and what they tried to achieve. Close to the Edge in 1972, came out, sold 1 million copies, went right to the top of the charts, right? It stayed there. Even people who hate prog have to begrudgingly say that this album's amazing, right? Even though it's so full-on prog, there is no compromise on this album. It's just wonderful, and it's so full of so many wonderful moments. It is their best album. It is better than Fragile. When I think about it, they never put a foot wrong. They never put a foot wrong. And the truth is that those incredible tracks on Fragile, like In the Heart of the Sunrise and Roundabout, Pop, those two tracks are also equal to anything on this album. Long Distance Run Around, yes, those three, they're equal to anything on this album. And if you take those, you would have like a little mini Close to the Edge. If you just had a little EP with those two big epics and then that little track on there, that would be equal to this. But Close to the Edge is perfection in terms of prog, isn't it? It's perfection. So what have we learned from this video? What we've learned from this video is, yes, is 1970s, yes. What we've learned for this video is that I think their reputation would have been much better if after 90125 they'd either written another massive hit album. But we'd be saying, you know what the trajectory would have been then? It would have been Genesis's trajectory. And we would have had to put up with the equivalent of I Can't Dance. I was in the hairdressers the other day with my daughter. She was having a haircut, and on the radio, I Can't Dance came up, and everyone was really enjoying it, and they were called Cut to the Hair, and I Can't Dance, and everyone's doing that Hofmeister Bear thing. It's a good track, isn't it? It's good. It's a good track. Phil Collins has got a very emotive and soulful voice, and it's basically money for nothing, isn't it? That's what they're trying to do, and I don't want Genesis to do that, right? And I don't want Yes to do that either, so I'm glad they didn't do it. I'm glad they went back. Union's okay, that's a good album. It's a bit overproduced, but it's a good album. Where do we end with this? What's my point? My point is that I think we'd often be better if bands just called it a day at the right time and went off and did something else. But then they would have to let go. And they can't let go. That's the downfall of most bands, is not being able to let go. Bands, you need to let go, but it's irrelevant now because this era has gone. It's waned. We're talking 50 years ago now. 50 years ago, Yes were all on holiday writing their solo albums. If you like this video, stick a like on it. If you want to see some more, then please subscribe and hit the subscribe button. If you want to become a patron, I have a link down below. You can become a free member or a paid up member. Whatever you want to do, you can do. I've got a Substack. I've got a Bandcamp. You can become a subscriber to my Bandcamp if you're interested in what my music's like. There's over 50 albums there. I've nearly finished another album. I have created a place where I can make albums, and I can do it here in this with my little studio behind me and bang these albums out every couple of months. I can express myself. I don't have to worry about being in a band. I don't have to worry about gigs. I don't have to worry about other musicians getting on my nerves. I'm self-sufficient. All I need, and I've got some, but the more subscribers, the better, really. So go and subscribe. You can always stop, but you will get access to 50 albums for the cost of your money. You can download them all and have them. This is the way it should be. Right, if you're listening to stuff that's digital. If you want to buy stuff, I'm afraid I haven't made any. But if I get enough subscribers, one day I might actually start pressing some of my stuff on vinyl. That's the future of the music industry. So if you'd like to support me there, that'd be great. I've got a PayPal tip jar. If you want to give me a little tip, because you enjoyed this video, please do so. And if you enjoy what I'm doing, go and tell your friends and get them to come and watch and all that bit. I hope you enjoy this video. I apologise for my scab. It is healing, as you can see. It's getting better. Cut myself shaving. It's nothing major. Right, I haven't got some sort of necrotic flesh-eating illness. No, I haven't. I know some of you wish that I had, but I haven't. It hasn't happened yet. Maybe one day, but not today. I am done. I'm going to go out now and have a cup of coffee. Thank you.